What would drive a reigning monarch to sign away a generational artifact in secret without informing his own wife? In a shock move that blindsided the palace, King Charles III authorized the private transfer of the most symbolically potent Windsor heirloom, the family ring, directly to Catherine, Princess of Wales. The twist? Camilla wasn't even notified. This wasn't just a transfer. It was a royal rupture, sealed under the cover of night. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. What unfolded in the shadows of the palace that night was not the impulsive action of a weary king, but the calculated move of a man whose trust in the very structure surrounding him had begun to collapse. For years, whispers had followed the family ring like a ghost through royal corridors, a relic rumored to trace back to Queen Mary herself, rarely seen, fiercely protected, and never casually handled. It was said to surface only at moments when the monarchy stood at a crossroads, when the future required silent decisions rather than public declarations. And now, without warning, without ceremony, without witnesses, that ring was moving again. Charles's faith in the palace hierarchy had been eroding quietly but steadily, worn down by internal maneuvering, fractured loyalties, and a growing sense that too many voices claimed authority over the crown's inner sanctum. Advisors once trusted were now kept at arm's length. Long-standing channels of protocol were bypassed. Even senior aides began to notice that briefings were becoming selective, that decisions were being made in smaller rooms, with fewer eyes present. It was within this atmosphere of controlled isolation that Catherine was summoned, not publicly, not ceremonially, but discreetly, unaccompanied, under full security discretion, escorted through passages rarely used outside moments of crisis. No entourage, no announcements, only the weight of anticipation pressing into the silence as she was led toward a private study where the air itself felt burdened with consequence. On the desk before her waited a velvet box, its surface untouched by light, its unbroken wax seal bearing the unmistakable mark of royal finality. No words were offered at first. The unspoken message hung between them, heavier than any proclamation ever could. This was not a gift. This was a transfer of something far older than favor, far more dangerous than jewelry. When Charles finally moved, it was not with hesitation but with resolve. The document beside the box bore only his signature, no witnesses, no royal advisors, no layers of authorization, just his own ink carving permanence into parchment. The act was swift, final, uncontested. With that single stroke, a generational line was quietly rerouted, and in the midst of this silent transaction stood the absence that roared loudest of all Camilla's complete exclusion. No warning reached her rooms, no discreet briefing followed. No carefully worded explanation arrived after the fact. There was no heads-up, no afterthought, no ritual of courtesy. In the world of the monarchy, where even symbolic gestures ripple through bloodlines and alliances, this omission was not oversight. It was strategy. It was intent. It was a message delivered through silence. And silence in the palace has always been the sharpest weapon of all. As Catherine left that secluded study, the ring no longer sealed in velvet, but bound to a fate yet to be revealed, the tone of the monarchy shifted in ways no official statement could ever capture. Something irreversible had begun moving beneath the surface, and those closest to the crown had not yet realized how deep the fault line truly ran. But what made this ancient ring so dangerous? And why was Catherine the only one deemed worthy of its legacy? It wasn't just a ring, it was a crown in disguise. Passed down through monarchs and matriarchs, the family ring was never worn in public, but always present in moments of royal power transfers. And there was one unspoken rule whispered through generations: not all consorts are chosen to hold it. For Camilla, this silent tradition now cuts deeper than any public title she's ever worn. Behind the grandeur and formality of the monarchy lies a system of hidden rituals, those not meant for newspapers or televised ceremonies, but preserved through centuries of selective memory. The family ring belonged to that realm of sacred silence. Its origins reach as far back as Edward VIII's hidden vaults, locked away during the abdication crisis, and quietly retrieved by Queen Elizabeth herself, after years of deliberate omission. It passed from gloved hand to gloved hand, never openly discussed, yet always feared by those who understood its meaning. The ring was not a decoration, it was a verdict. Its symbolic presence inside the Clarion chamber, a place where only bloodline and oath matter, solidified it as more than ornamental. It had appeared in just 4 known moments since the Second World War, each time quietly surfacing before a pivotal shift within the crown. The ring was seen resting beside Queen Elizabeth during her final private assembly with her eldest son. Those who served within the Clarion ranks understood the significance without needing explanation. The act of displaying the ring was itself a prophecy, silent but irrevocable. Yet what few knew was that Diana had once been offered the ring in private. She declined, not out of pride or distance, but sorrow. According to one close confidant, Diana believed the ring represented a legacy she was never meant to carry, a burden shaped in pain, not power. Following Diana's decision, Charles kept the ring sealed. Even after his coronation, it remained untouched, encased behind 2 layers of protection, and marked with a single directive from Elizabeth herself. Do not move this until you are certain. And for years, he wasn't. But the tides within the palace had begun to shift. Camilla's growing presence within ceremonial matters only sharpened tensions between tradition and adaptation. Despite her title as Queen Consort, Camilla struggled to reconcile with artifacts of royal lineage she had no ancestral claim to. The ring was one of them. Behind the scenes, according to multiple sources within the royal archive, Camilla made repeated inquiries regarding legacy items, many of which were carefully brushed aside or denied access entirely. Those same archivists later revealed private discomfort over her insistence to review personal tokens of the late Queen, most notably the family ring. Over time, a quiet unease settled between Camilla and those who had long guarded the monarchy's inner relics. The divide wasn't openly discussed, but it was deeply felt. Her title gave her presence in public, but not always power in private. And so when Charles finally broke the seal and prepared the ring's transfer, there was no announcement, no explanation, and certainly no inclusion. The ring's journey was already in motion, and it was heading toward Catherine not by protocol, but by instinct. For Charles, this wasn't about favoritism, it was about survival. And in Catherine, he saw the one figure who could carry the weight of the old world while navigating the chaos of the new. The decision was made, the directive sealed. Camilla never touched the ring, and she never would. And then came the quiet rehearsal where Catherine, alone in the blue room, was told to wear the ring and not remove it. It wasn't a ceremony, it was a vow. Alone in the palace's blue room, Catherine was instructed to slip on the family ring. No fanfare, no press, just silence, an oath whispered from the past, and a scroll marked Appendix Windsor 4. What she said next shook the attending archivists and echoed through royal walls, not meant to hear it. The blue room had not been used in over 3 decades. It was not for public addresses, not for royal portraits, not even for mourning. Its very existence had faded into legend, a chamber reserved only for rites of lineage, those rituals designed not for spectacle, but for soul-binding responsibility. When Catherine crossed its threshold, she stepped into a tradition so old, so veiled, that even senior royals whispered its purpose only in metaphor. The doors were closed, no court attendance allowed. Only 2 archivists, a royal transcriber, and a sealed trunk containing items untouched since Queen Elizabeth's final days. And then, under the stillness that gripped the room, the ritual began. Catherine was handed the scroll, first aged, cracked, and bound with a silver thread marked in red wax. Across its fold, the words Appendix Windsor 4 gleamed faintly, as if the parchment remembered being read only in times of immense weight. Her hands hesitated. She asked once if she should read it silently. The lead archivist, voice hushed but resolute, replied, "You must say the words aloud." The royal transcriber nodded, ink already flowing. With every line she read, the air in the room changed. Her voice was steady, but her breathing betrayed something deeper: shock, revelation, perhaps fear. Though the full contents of the scroll remain sealed from public knowledge, one thing is certain. Her reaction did not go unnoticed. The archivists recorded a pause, 15 seconds of complete silence after she reached the phrase believed to contain the central directive of the transfer. The royal transcriber made a marginal note. Eyes widened, lips parted, whispered repetition of final passage. Only after the reading did the archivists present the family ring, still resting in the velvet box Charles had signed days prior. But now, a detail previously unknown emerged. Beneath the ring's setting, inscribed in miniature etching, were the words, "Custodian, not wearer." This was no decorative ring. It was a vessel of obligation, one not meant for display, but for legacy protection. Alongside it came a smaller box, marked with the obsidian insignia. Within it, the key, small, blackened, and ancient. This was the fabled obsidian key, long thought to be held under lock in Balmoral's east wing. Its sudden reappearance confirmed suspicions. This transfer had been years in the making, possibly even anticipated by the late Queen herself. And yet, for all its clarity, the ritual still left behind one glaring shadow, the story of Princess Anne. Whispers had long followed Anne's footsteps, suggesting she too had been summoned to the Blue Room decades earlier. But unlike Catherine, she reportedly refused the ring, not out of rebellion, but resolve. She had chosen another path, one of service, not symbolism. That refusal had shifted the trajectory of royal stewardship, and now, with Catherine accepting the very vow her aunt had declined, the burden of continuity once again found its home. As the transcriber completed the final note and the chamber returned to silence, a truth settled over the gathered witnesses. A new chapter had begun, unannounced, unpublicized, but irreversible. But as Catherine's role was being cemented in secrecy, Camilla's reality was unraveling without a single soul informing her. Camilla was left in the dark, literally. As the ring was being transferred and oaths made behind locked doors, she was in another wing told nothing. Staff instructed to avoid discussion. Communications temporarily restricted. For a woman crowned queen consort, her exclusion was more than disrespect, it was exile by omission. That morning, her schedule was abruptly cleared, meetings cancelled without explanation. A luncheon with Commonwealth delegates postponed. Her private secretary offered no reasoning, only that a change in internal security had made the day's engagements unfeasible. Camilla, never one to accept silence without suspicion, began asking questions, but the walls had already closed in. Every inquiry was met with detachment, tight-lipped aides, diverted glances, rehearsed responses that revealed nothing but resistance. The air had changed, and she felt it in her bones. Something was being hidden, and she wasn't meant to know. It was during a corridor walk near the state apartments when Camilla overheard it, one aide whispering to another, "The ring has moved." That phrase, small and passing, landed like thunder in her ears. She stopped mid-step, said nothing. But inside, her fury began to rise like steam behind glass. The family ring, the one artifact she had long been unable to even approach, let alone claim, was moving. And no one had informed her? That evening, she demanded to speak to Charles directly. She was told he was resting under medical supervision and could not be disturbed. A new assistant relayed this message, not her usual liaison. The shift was intentional. She recognized the tactic immediately. He was being protected from her. Under health protocol, she was being kept away. By nightfall, Camilla attempted access to the eastern wing of the palace, her usual route to Charles's study, but her keycard failed. Security logs later confirmed that her permissions had been restricted, marked temporary. She had been locked out. No explanation, no discussion, just quiet rejection from within her own walls. She returned to her rooms and made a call to her chief household advisor. They didn't answer. The phone rang 6 times before it dropped. Something was happening, and no one was telling her. Later that night, she reportedly confided in one of her few remaining loyal attendants, asking a question so sharp so revealing that it left them stunned. As Catherine moved into Elizabeth's suite, the words themselves were loaded. Catherine wasn't just being honoured, she was being positioned. The former Queen's private quarters had long remained unclaimed. For Camilla to even ask meant she had already sensed the shift in power, and that shift had occurred without her voice, without her consent, and without her presence. By the next morning, Camilla was no longer trying to play calm. Her tone, her posture, her very presence in the palace halls had changed. The woman once seen commanding attention now moved with suspicion. Her glances became sharp, her words clipped. The courtiers, sensing her unraveling, began avoiding her entirely. What she had feared in whispers was now confirmed in silence. Power had moved, and she had not been consulted. But the moment Camilla pieced together what was happening, she demanded confrontation. It happened in the marble corridor, unexpected, unfiltered, and unforgettable. Camilla had had enough. She intercepted Catherine as she exited a closed-door session with the royal archivist. Tension exploded. Words were exchanged. Allegiances shattered. The royal cameras were off, but a private guard leaked the account. It was no longer quiet war. It was a reckoning. In the days following her silent exclusion and denied access, Camilla had simmered with mounting rage. Palace whispers filled the void she was forced to inhabit, each fragment of truth cutting deeper than the last. And when she spotted Catherine alone, stepping out from a restricted wing with a document folder in hand and the unmistakable weight of new authority in her gaze, something snapped. No longer content to be sidelined by veiled decisions and half-kept secrets, Camilla stepped into her path and demanded clarity, her voice echoing with years of tension and freshly inflicted betrayal. "Are you trying to erase me?" she hissed, a question not of curiosity but accusation. Catherine didn't flinch. She didn't raise her voice, but her reply landed with the force of a palace bell tolling through history. Sharp. An undeniable confirmation of what Camilla feared most. This transfer had come from Charles himself, without her inclusion and with deliberate intent. A nearby royal guard, later speaking under anonymity, claimed Camilla reached for Catherine's wrist, allegedly attempting to glimpse the ring. She needed to see it. Needed to prove to herself it was real. What followed remains partially redacted in internal records, but what is known is that royal aides intervened within seconds. Voices were raised, hands were separated, dignity hung by a thread. And still, no formal statement followed. The palace issued nothing, not a word. Silence wrapped around the incident like a shroud, designed to smother it before it could ignite. Behind the walls, however, the event left tremors. Staff who once orbited Camilla began rethinking their loyalties. Some quietly stepped back from her inner circle, unwilling to be caught in the gravitational pull of a queen whose authority had been shaken in front of a future sovereign. Charles, notably, remained locked in his private quarters during the confrontation. He was briefed, but did not emerge. Sources close to the monarch said he was aware but reserved, a phrase that did little to shield him from quiet criticism. It was his absence that said more than any intervention could. And yet, what followed revealed the palace's growing desire to contain the fire before it spread. Aides were given strict directives. No incident occurred. No records, no transcripts, no acknowledgement. Internal cameras in that corridor were reportedly switched off for maintenance during the exact time frame. It was the closest thing to erasure Camilla had ever experienced. Still, erasure only fuels resistance. And Camilla, bruised but not broken, began reaching out to old allies, hoping to reassert control over her position, to remind the institution she still had teeth. But the palace had already moved forward, quietly, unapologetically, and while Camilla was rallying what remained of her standing, a sealed envelope was already en route to Catherine, bearing a wax crest, a coded cipher, and a new command from the very throne she once thought unshakable. But just when Camilla thought she could gather her forces, a new order arrived, and this time, it was official. The ring wasn't the only thing King Charles had prepared. Days later, a discreet envelope, sealed with red wax and marked with the royal cipher, was delivered to Catherine. Inside a key, and beneath that, a velvet pouch containing an item never photographed, believed to have belonged to Queen Victoria herself. The implications? Unmistakable. Catherine wasn't just wearing legacy. She was becoming it. No announcement was made. No event was scheduled. And yet, what arrived in Catherine's private quarters that afternoon sent tremors through the corridors of Windsor. The velvet pouch, smaller than a palm, bore the stitching long associated with the long-dormant obsidian archive, a name rarely spoken outside of royal preservation circles, often dismissed as folklore. But those who knew the code recognized it instantly. The obsidian archive had been sealed since the 1942, its contents locked away after a disputed succession scandal. Only one monarch had accessed it since, Queen Elizabeth II. And she had left it untouched at Balmoral's East Wing, under a clause requiring her direct heir's written approval for entry. That approval had now been granted, and the artifact it yielded had been passed to Catherine. Inside the pouch was a miniature cipher dial, hand-carved, with rotating gold initials that aligned only when paired with a corresponding vault door embedded beneath Windsor's lower levels. The symbol on the dial matched the crest etched into the original Clarion Council scroll, a link suggesting deeper authority than mere symbolic inheritance. With it came a note, scribbled not by a secretary or court historian, but by Charles himself. 4 words, underlined with royal ink: "For your stewardship, not display." The phrasing was subtle, but it carried thunder. This wasn't just an heirloom. It was a charge, a directive, a silent acknowledgement that Catherine was now trusted with legacy elements even the reigning queen consort had never touched. What was entrusted to her wasn't to be flaunted, it was to be guarded, studied, and when the time came, revealed. Almost immediately, word of the pouch's arrival began to ripple across private royal networks. Insiders, staffers, and former aides began speaking in whispers about what it truly meant. The cipher dial, they said, hadn't been moved since Queen Victoria's death. Others claimed it had only appeared once before during the early weeks of Elizabeth's reign, when she was still finding her footing amid Churchill's tight grip. That Charles had retrieved it now and passed it not to his wife, but to his daughter-in-law was viewed by some as a moment of profound clarity, and by others as the spark of something far more dangerous. Royal watchers began speculating openly that Catherine's future had surpassed the traditional bounds of queen consort. This wasn't about waiting in line anymore. This was about preparing for a deeper crown, the one not made of jewels, but of history, burden, and power. And then came the term, coined first by a palace researcher and repeated within Clarion chambers by the end of the week, the invisible coronation. It spread quietly, unspoken in public, but known within the palace. It described what had just happened without saying it outright. A coronation not with a crown, but with access. Not in front of cameras, but within the sealed vaults of a monarchy that protects its soul behind steel and parchment. With the cipher dial now in her possession, Catherine held more than just keys. She held the map to the monarchy's past and, perhaps, its unspoken future. But legacy doesn't just transfer, it awakens dormant forces. And soon, Camilla wasn't the only one raising alarms. The fallout from the ring's transfer ignited sparks in every corner of the royal structure. Princess Anne called for an emergency Clarion assembly. Prince Edward demanded access to the royal record logs. The family wasn't just witnessing a shift in symbolism, they were watching the monarchy's gravitational center move, and not everyone was comfortable. The tremor that had started in silence now rolled through the heart of the institution, splitting generations and traditions down a fault line that could no longer be denied. Anne, long known as the Iron Will of the House of Windsor, wasted no time. Her message to Charles was sharp, unwavering, and delivered in person. Tradition must be declared, not hidden. She wasn't questioning Catherine's worth, but the secrecy that had surrounded it. For Anne, power must never whisper, it must stand tall, and this was all too quiet. Prince Edward's reaction, however, carried an urgency that went deeper. As keeper of the royal archives, he had expected to be notified before any object or document marked under Appendix Windsor 4 was accessed, let alone activated, but he wasn't. The sealed logs were bypassed, the scroll was retrieved, and the cipher dial now sat in Catherine's hands. Edward confronted the royal archivist directly, demanding an explanation. What he received instead was a nervous shrug and a sealed memo, "Under sovereign directive." That phrase, known to override all traditional protocol, confirmed one thing. Charles had ordered it alone. No council, no committee, and no consultation. That realization set off a storm inside the palace. The internal council, composed of senior royals, legal advisors, and ceremonial officers, was now fractured. Half saw Catherine's rise as essential, a preemptive evolution to preserve the crown's future. The other half saw chaos. If roles could be reassigned this swiftly, if power could be inherited without declaration, then nothing was secure. Historical precedent became their battleground. Names like Queen Mary were whispered behind doors, especially her infamous decision to bypass her daughter-in-law in the distribution of heirlooms, which led to years of quiet estrangement. The comparison was not lost on anyone. Had Charles just repeated the same maneuver, only in a more institutional, irreversible way? Tensions deepened. Surveillance across royal archive points was suddenly increased. Guards rotated more frequently. Access credentials were reviewed. Someone inside had known. Someone had helped facilitate the movement of the ring, the scroll, and the cipher pouch without alerting key figures. And now, the search for that someone had begun. What troubled many wasn't just what had been done, but how fast it had all unfolded. The sequence was tight, precise. This hadn't been spontaneous, it had been planned. The question no one dared ask out loud was now growing too large to suppress. Who else knew? Who else stood behind this orchestration? Was Catherine truly just the recipient, or was she already steering the wheel from behind the veil? The old guard began scanning for patterns, signals, signs that this shift had been in motion long before it became visible. And just as the family began spiraling into speculation and guarded meetings, a single moment emerged outside the palace, unexpected, unrehearsed, and destined to shatter whatever illusions remained. And while the family scrambled for answers, the public was about to receive one final, breathtaking clue. She wore it, and the world noticed. During a state engagement weeks later, Catherine appeared subtly, but unmistakably wearing the family ring. Photographers caught it. Social media erupted. Newspapers speculated wildly, but it was one image that made headlines. Catherine raising her hand, the ring in full view, standing beside Charles, while Camilla was nowhere in sight. The image alone detonated months of secrecy in a single frame. It wasn't the ring's placement on her finger that mattered, it was its symbolism, its undeniable presence, and the thunderous silence surrounding its meaning. The palace had not announced any formal transfer. There had been no press release, no ceremonial reveal. And yet, there it was, the most fiercely guarded heirloom in royal history, now flashing under the public eye without apology. For many watching, it felt less like a gesture and more like a statement, one too loaded to ignore. The timing of the event only deepened the mystery. Camilla, once confirmed to attend, had suddenly cancelled her appearance just hours before. The official explanation cited routine travel, but few believed it. Whispers within court circles painted a very different picture. Sources close to her team described the days leading up to the engagement as tense, combative, and filled with a sense of dread. That she was absent from a gathering so pivotal one that brought together foreign dignitaries, senior royals, and military leaders was not just a coincidence, it was a vacuum. And Catherine filled it with undeniable composure, standing beside the king, her hand visible, the ring blazing like a seal of inheritance no one dared question aloud. Global media reacted instantly. Headlines called her the shadow monarch. Analysts dissected every angle of the photograph. Fashion commentators tried to deflect, but the weight of what the ring represented crushed all distraction. Within 24 hours, the image became the most shared royal photo in a decade. Millions reposted it. Royal forums exploded. International broadcasters replayed footage on loop, zooming in on the ring, slowing down Charles's glance toward Catherine, highlighting the near imperceptible nod he gave her midway through the ceremony. It was subtle, but for those who understood the gravity of royal body language, it spoke volumes. No words were exchanged. There didn't need to be. The nod was approval, and in that moment, everything shifted. The crowd may have applauded the event, but their eyes were on the ring and what it now meant. Catherine wasn't standing in as a consort anymore. She was anchoring the future in plain sight. Inside the palace, the atmosphere was one of controlled panic. Journalists requested clarification. Press officers were given strict instructions. No formal statement will be made about the ring. This calculated silence only intensified speculation. What had once been hidden behind archive doors and private oaths was now rippling through international discourse. The world had seen the symbol. They didn't need a press briefing. They already knew. Camilla, still silent, reportedly refused all media interaction. Some said she had fled to a private estate. Others claimed she was demanding intervention from her remaining allies within the council. But intervention wouldn't stop what had already begun. Because Catherine had not claimed power, it had been placed upon her visibly, unshakably, and with royal precedent. But just as the world began adjusting to this new image of power, one final revelation changed everything we thought we knew. Locked in Charles's safe was a single codicil recently added, marked Post-Legacy Transfer Directive. It was uncovered after a palace auditor flagged discrepancies in the heirloom registry. What it contained left the council silent. In one final move, Charles clarified what the ring meant, what it signaled, and who the monarchy would ultimately answer to. Buried among centuries-old documents and sealed beneath the sovereign's cipher, the codicil was never meant for public eyes. Its discovery was not planned, it was provoked. An internal audit had been initiated after multiple archives were accessed without recorded authorization, triggering a quiet investigation. But no one expected to find what lay behind the false panel in the king's private vault. The sealed parchment bore Charles's handwriting and his personal seal. And when it was brought before the senior council, its contents reshaped everything. The codicil did not merely acknowledge the ring's transfer, it elevated it. It declared, in no uncertain terms, that the family ring was not just a symbol of inheritance, but of internal stewardship, passed at the monarch's discretion to the figure deemed most capable of preserving the crown's intangible legacy. The document introduced a title never before used publicly, the Lady of Clarion. And beside that title stood only one name, Catherine. Not as princess, not as consort, but as first custodian of heritage affairs, with full ceremonial authority over archival access, legacy rights, and lineage continuity. It was a role that, though absent from any published royal framework, now existed in writing, bearing the weight of a sovereign's final private order. The meaning was seismic. Catherine had not simply received a ring. She had been entrusted with the monarchy's hidden soul. The codicil did more than elevate it, redefined. Camilla's official role was amended within the document. The term Queen Consort was no longer attached to ceremonial heritage oversight. Instead, her function was restated as senior consort of civic patronage, a position still respected, still influential, but stripped of any claim to historical stewardship. The change was subtle in language, but immense in consequence. Within royal circles, it sent a chilling message. The crown's emotional and ancestral compass had been realigned, and with it, so too had the loyalties of the institution. Even more poignant was the final clause, handwritten and underlined by Charles himself. It read simply, "To the one Diana knew would carry this flame." That single line fractured whatever neutrality remained in the room. For many present, it confirmed what had long been speculated, but never spoken. This wasn't just about the future. It was about redemption, completion, and a legacy redirected with intention. The Royal Clarion Chamber was quietly scheduled to reconvene in the spring. Officials refused to disclose the agenda, but insiders believed it would center on implementing the codicil's directives in full, possibly including constitutional amendments within internal charters of the House of Windsor. Rumors swirled of new insignia designs, unseen ceremonial protocols, and a second archival vault set to be unlocked. Whatever was coming, it would not be soft, it would be historic. And the monarchy, as the world knew it, would emerge changed. This was not an abdication. It was not a coronation. It was something far older and far more deliberate. A passing of power not bound by titles or tiaras, but by quiet conviction and sovereign will. And so, in one silent act behind royal walls, a crown shifted not from head to head, but from history into the hands of the future. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.